Hey, what's up, YouTube? Red and Bordy here. Today, we are going to talk about the January alpha updates and, in specific, the crafting. Basically revisited. They put out another article aside from the patch notes, Bordy, on their official website. So we're going to go through that today. Bordy, so overall, what are your thoughts on the changes before we dive into the details?
So I think they're good, man. Their vision for crafting, I think, is pretty spot on, and I like the changes overall. I think there's some good stuff in there, but we'll see how it plays out, I guess.
Yeah, so a lot of people have a big passion for crafting and economics and gathering in MMOs, and this is going to be, I think, some massive changes and pushes towards a more defined, more detailed system for them. So I'm very excited for that demographic of players, and we're gonna hop right in here. So they listed their vision, kind of like they did with the combat, Bordy, and I think it's pretty interesting. So we'll hit the high points here as we go into the new changes to keep you guys updated. So gathering and crafting needs to have a tangible value. So this is really important. I know to a lot of those players, these people like to feel, I hate to say the word needed, but they do. They want to be part of the overall game loop, the overall gameplay, and I think that's a big part to this community.
Yeah, and as they should. I mean, as a crafter, you should be a part of the overall game loop and the bigger picture. You shouldn't just be sitting aside doing your own thing, right? It's an MMO with an economy that should be working as an economy. I mean, without crafters and without that depth of crafting, I think an MMO is severely lacking. I think a good crafting and gathering system in an MMO is one of the pinnacles of what makes an MMO good, in my opinion.
Yes, especially if you're going for any sort of like player-driven economy. You really want, your players, your crafters and gatherers to be one of the big parts of that because, like you said, it's an MMO. The second point that they make here is possibilities should be as broad as they are deep. Now, this is another important thing, not just for crafting, but for the overall gameplay of New World. I think that they are continuing to work on this particular issue in both crafting and in overall gameplay.
Yeah, this is incredibly encouraging, I think, as one of their pillars for their vision of crafting, because you want crafting to be broad and deep. You don't want to just have a really intricate, deep crafting system, but only a few choices to craft or a few things that you can make. That's not very fun. And you also don't want it to be incredibly broad where there's all these choices and all these things you can make, but there's no depth to crafting, right? You want to combine both of those to make a very intricate crafting system, a very fun crafting system. So I'm really glad they recognize that. And I like this. It's one of their key pillars, man. It's a very good point.
Yes, and the last one for their vision on crafting is progression should feel rewarding, not hindered. And this is a big deal because I think a lot of the times there's a lot of like false walls or progression walls that games put up to kind of make it feel like you're progressing, but in truth, it doesn't feel rewarding in the end because you're working so hard for so little. That can just kind of overall hurt the feel of any sort of progression in the MMO, particularly in crafting as well. So Bordy, it's good to see that they're focusing on a rewarding type of system for gatherers and crafters.
Yeah, absolutely, man. You don't want it to feel like a job whenever you're playing an MMO. You want it to be fun and a rewarding experience. And so a lot of MMOs you can get into and then you can play, and you got to get on there and play and grind out your crafting. It legit feels like a job. You have to get on there and you have to be there to get this specific thing done. And it shouldn't be that way. It should be a very rewarding, very fun experience. And so progression and crafting shouldn't be something that hinders your gameplay, but adds to it. So I like that, man. All three of these pillars of their vision, in my opinion, are spot on. Just like they were with the combat changes, man. They're very realistic and they're very good. They're very good topics and points for them to work on moving forward. Now, we just hope they can hit all of these three pillars, right? And they can all work together in conjunction to make a fantastic crafting system. And that's yet to be determined, but hopefully it'll happen, man. It's promising for sure.
Yeah, and it's just, again, encouraging. They're paying a lot of attention to the details in New World because that is truly, I think, where you make a great game. Each of these intricate pieces of any type of gameplay or game loop, you definitely love to see that attention to detail. And you can tell that the New World team's very passionate about getting this right. So here we did go over the recent crafting changes and a couple of our other videos and on our podcast New World to Go. So on this video, we're definitely just going to hit the January changes. But if you're interested in what they changed so far, you should go check out one of our past videos. So Bordy, here is the first change to January, or in January to crafting, and dude, they do make a point to say that these are going to be some of the biggest changes that these two systems are going to see. So materials and resources now display their rarity. One of the changes that goes hand in hand with something that we talked about earlier in this post, which is the addition of new material tiers, is that there are many resources and materials now in the world, some of which are hard to find. The other item rarity is now displayed on each item's tooltip, making it easier to tell if you've got an extra valuable find. Bordy, I love this. In particularly, I remember lightweight is a very important thing to me in my build that I was working on in New World. And it's nice to see now that these items are going to have a signal to how rare they are. It's letting crafters and gatherers know, again, that these things are valuable and well sought out.
Yeah, absolutely. Before it was hard to tell, right? Whenever you got a resource or something, you didn't know how valuable it was. Well, now we do. Great change, man. I like it.
For sure. Okay, so the next one we have here is categorical and ingredients can be used in recipes. So this is interesting. In certain recipes, you'll now see that you can use categorical ingredients rather than specific ones. So for example, a cooking recipe might call for a vegetable rather than carrots, allowing a player to add an ingredient as a vegetable, carrot, or otherwise, which opens up the options that you have for crafting those recipes. Now, Bordy, this is awesome to me because it does allow for like intuitive interaction from the crafter to kind of create their own unique piece of in this case, food, but in general, they're crafting items.
Yeah, for sure. And in my opinion, this is just a really big quality of life adjustment, right? Because whenever you're creating some of the food in New World specifically, we'll use their example right here. It's a lot better if you have all of these resources in your bag and you're trying to craft one certain food and you can't craft it because you don't have one specific ingredient, but you have all these other ingredients. Yeah. It kind of sucks, man. And then you have to go out and specifically farm that one ingredient. You have to go to a very specific farm to get carrots or cabbage or whatever you're looking for to farm that just to make that one thing. It gets pretty mundane, and that type of gameplay, in my opinion, is not very fun. So it's fun whenever you're out in the world and you just gather up a whole bunch of stuff, and then you can go back to the crafting station and you just have a lot more opportunity to craft items out of what you have. I really enjoy that. I like that. I think it's a good change, man.
Yes, and like you had mentioned, there's nothing more frustrating than in a game, especially because I'm not specifically a crafter, but when I try to venture into the crafting realm and there's just so many different items that take up your bag space and so many different recipes that you're like missing one or two items from. I love to see that they're simplifying that frustration in the crafting system. They're allowing players to, diversify a little bit, but still yet get to their goal of crafting that item. So the next thing, Bordy, they have, there are more recipes than ever before. So they basically, to go along with all the new materials and resources, there has been a dramatic increase in the number of recipes you can craft. From the addition of named weapons and armor pieces to a massive selection of foods, there are now far more choices for players who want to craft items. Along with adding depth to the system overall, this should help crafting find its place in the in-game play. Bordy, this is something we've mentioned a lot. Is crafting going to be viable once we hit max level? Once we get everything figured out and we're kind of getting those drops that they've kind of specified are important in the game. How viable is the crafting and gathering side of the game, and it's cool to see that they're expanding upon that.
Yeah, I know they've touched on that before, that they want crafting and gathering to be a very important part of the game, even at in-game. But I think this particular point also plays into some of their vision that was outlined earlier, that they want possibilities should be as broad as they are deep. That's one of the statements they made, right? So with this change, this says that there's more recipes than ever before. So that's the broad aspect of it, right? So now they're just broadening out the amount of things you can craft. So that's good, man. It's spot on with their vision. And I think more options for crafters is a good thing. I think at some point that can start to be almost a negative thing if there's only a few items that are worth crafting and then the rest aren't. So they got to be real careful about that, or they have to be real careful about that. That grammar was terrible there, but so I hope that they're very mindful of that, and they don't make just a handful of items that everyone wants to craft, and then the rest is just kind of there for whatever reason, just to say that they have a broad crafting system. So I hope that they all have meaning.
Yes, and that's a great point. Here is the next thing that kind of ties into this. You have new ways to make items. So some items you craft have very specific recipes, while others have flexible ones with materials or resources that you can use in them. For example, when crafting a steel sword, you can use higher tier or rarity of wood or leather components that the recipe calls for. There are even special resources like animal horns, fey iron. They can be used in places of other resources if you find them. Use these higher tier or rare resources that will affect the power of the item that is made. So here is, again, like you had mentioned, a way that they can kind of keep everything viable, or all these recipes viable that they have, which is basically a way that they can tie the particular pieces of material that you're using, kind of like we mentioned before in the cooking or crafting, that you can make those choices that change the way the recipe works, and now it's going to affect the actual item that you make. So when you're making a sword, if you throw in a little bit of a rare piece of metal or a rare horn, or something like that, you're going to get a different iron sword than you would initially if you would have just crafted that basic recipe. And so then, to me, that's going to create a wider variety of the same recipes that we're using, kind of, making most of them viable in many different circumstances.
Yeah, it's a great change for sure, and I think this also plays into their vision that they had talked about as well. This kind of plays into the deep part of crafting, right? In my opinion, being able to use different resources to craft different things and different rarities makes the crafting a little bit more deeper, gives a little bit more depth to the crafting. So I like it, man. I think this yet again is a good change, man. So far, so good, dude. I don't see anything crazy in here yet. It's all good in my opinion so far.
Yeah, for sure. So the last thing, Bordy, that we have here is trade skill progression. So trade skill progression has been changed. We mentioned earlier that logging and tracking and skinning skills are unlocked. They basically were levelless. You could level them or infinitely level them. So now they have, in this release, all the trade skill progression has been refined to a cap of 200, which will bring consistency across different crafting and gathering trees. Bordy, I know a lot of people like infinite progression systems, and New World used to have one, but I do like the change to a cap, which would allow them to, of course, expand upon that camp in later iterations of the game.
Yeah, I'm really not in the camp of infinite progression, man, just because I can't sit there and no life the game forever and just continue to progress. And that's really in all honesty, it's a little bit off-putting to me for me to want to even get into crafting, knowing that there's no end game for me. I know that a lot of people aren't in this boat. A lot of people do like the infinite crafting. For me personally, I like the cap at 200, and I agree that in future, like expansions or whatever, they can add new crafting items that have maybe a requirement of 300 skill to craft that item. So then that gives you a reason to get back in there and play the expansion, even if there's not really any content you want to play, even if it's just for crafting purposes. I personally like the change. I know that's probably a little bit of a controversial one, but I like it that it's capped now. Infinite progression is a little intimidating to me, man. I like to have a goal and be able to meet that goal.
Well, like you mentioned, it is difficult to, if you have crafters in the game that have leveled themselves up to 1,000, 2,000, and then, what are you going to do when you want to bring out an expansion? And obviously, if you want crafting and gathering to be a viable thing in the game, how are you going to bring out meaningful content for those players if they're already well above anything you bring out? So, yeah, it's interesting, but I do think it's a good change because it will allow them in the future to explore maybe higher tiered crafting. So, all right, Bordy, well, that about does it for this video. Again, we appreciate you guys. If you don't mind hitting the subscription button, the notification bell for more videos like this, we'd greatly appreciate it, Bordy. Dude, I'm excited about the changes that New World's making in crafting in general. The entire game, though, is looking to really shape up and be defined, and that's what the game needed. A lot of these changes that are going to translate into a more deep, interesting player experience.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It's heading in a good direction. I'm excited for it.
All right, guys. Well, thanks so much for watching, and we will see you in the next video.